Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Once a month as part of the design team over at the Counterfeit Kit Challenge, we are inspired by a kit to build our own scrapbooking kit, and then we also make our own scrapbooking supplies. And this time around, I am going to make some patterned paper, and I was inspired by two pieces of paper in this inspiration image. The yellow one that has some kind of machinery on it, as well as that bold stripe. Now these projects aren't too complicated, but creating a diagonal stripe has a little bit of a challenge to it, so let's start with that one. So the first challenge with doing a diagonal is that geometrically, mathematically speaking, the diagonal is always longer than the edge. And so if you're trying to cut the edge of a scrapbook paper and get it to fit on the diagonal, your 12 inches will not reach corner to corner. As you can see with my ruler here, that diagonal actually comes out to close to 17 inches. So here is one way to do that. You can lay a sheet of paper, a brand new sheet of paper, onto a large grid, line up those corners of the grid exactly in the same spot. So here I lined it up at 8.5 inches on the opposite corners, and then I will make a tick mark at the 8-inch mark and the 9-inch mark on both sides, the left and the right, and then I can draw a line in between those tick marks to create a straight line to cut with. Now, if you don't have a large grid mat, here's another way that you can give this a try. And the reason we need to start with a full sheet of paper is it needs to be square in order for the math to work out for when we're building this first stripe. And I'm going to use just a ruler, and clear see-through ruler is helpful because you can kind of tell when your little triangle that's underneath the ruler is about equal. And then once I think I have got it about equal, I bumped my ruler, so I will have to readjust. But as I shift the ruler around, I try to make that both sides, left and right of that triangle, look equal. And then I'm going to just create tick marks like I did previously. And then I will measure these tick marks so I don't have to do the exact same thing on the other side, and make sure both sides are close to the same. And that'll be good enough for starting this project. So I will transfer those tick marks, and I can't quite remember what the measurement was there, but I will transfer those tick marks over to that paper, and then we can trace a line in between these tick marks, which is another challenge because none of our measuring devices typically in scrapbooking don't reach this full length. So I just took some scrap cardstock, cut some strips, I think those are maybe 1.5-inch strips, and taped them together so that my edge was very flush. And once those were taped together, I've got this long ruler that I can use to draw a straight line. So I will carefully, I'm using a white gel pen, which is a slower tool, but you can use a pencil. Pencil would be good because then you can erase any leftover tick marks. And here is just another example of how our tools do not fit this measurement at all. So using a pair of scissors, I will go ahead and carefully and as straightly as I can cut that first starting piece. Now, my third solution for you is going to be working with piecing strips together instead of getting one long 17-inch solid strip. So I went ahead and did my 17-inch solid strip to start my project, but here I am piecing two strips together. And by the way, my strips are all 1 inch in size. And if you use pieces to piece together, using smaller patterns or solid cardstock is going to be more seamless looking. And getting your glue all the way up to the edge, both, the sides, and especially where they're going to butt up those pieces together, getting that glue all the way up so that the paper lays down nice and flat to the cardstock that you're gluing it to in the background. That will make for a more seamless look. But a word of caution here, if you use too much glue, it will squeeze out through those seams and then ooze on top of your paper. And even though the glue dries clear, it still creates a different sheen to the project, and it will make those seams more noticeable. So it's just enough glue without too much glue. I'm sure you can go make that work, right? So that is the best advice I have for you on trying to get these diagonal stripes to work on a sheet of paper. Now here I am trying to do my third row, and again, it still is too long for that 12 inches. I think I've got another 1.5 inches or something to go. So I will go ahead and piece my next piece together, which has a slightly larger pattern print to it. And I was trying to figure out if there was a way that I could trim it so those prints would overlap nicely and exactly. No go. So I'm just going to do the best I can and glue these pieces down. And when my projects are all done using this sheet of pattern paper, it's going to be very unlikely that any of these seams are really going to be that noticeable. And if you use the tips I gave you, you'll have good results. All right, I'm just going to continue working on this piece of paper with all of the strips that I have cut out. Of course, use whatever colors and patterns you like. And then I will roughly use my scissors to trim off all the edges so that it will fit back into my paper trimmer and that I can clearly see where that edge lines up with my cutting blade. And then I can trim that down and voila, I have a beautiful sheet of diagonal pattern paper, possibly even more beautiful than what you could buy at the store because you're using exactly the papers you want on this project. All right, we're going to move on to idea number 2, which is a much simpler idea. It is just using a whole bunch of stencils to layer up some lovely color and texture to create a vibe of a paper. Now, the inspiration had kind of mechanical machinery on it, as well as some circles, which had kind of a ruler measurement kind of style to them. I don't have machinery. I do have circles. I do have numbers. So I'm going to just pick stencils that have the vibe that I'm going for. And later I have a happy accident and I make this project even better. So I hope you'll stick around and watch the whole thing. Now I did choose colors that I have included in the kit that this paper is going into later. And if you haven't seen my kit build, the link will be up in the corner as well as is in the show description. And you can go ahead and check that out. Now this first stencil is a really old stencil. I believe it's a Studio Calico stencil that I've had for many years. It's a little bit of a challenge to use because it doesn't have an edge to hold onto. And so this is going to be one of those stencils where you definitely aren't going to go edge to edge with your stenciling. This one is going to fade out as you head towards the edges of that stencil. I am starting this project with the background being the lightest layer. And I'm doing that because I can always add darker things on top, but it is hard to take dark things away once you've gone overboard. So I always start with the lightest and work my way up to more saturated, more color. And along those same lines, I will always start with fewer areas and then fill in the gaps with more stenciling as I see spaces that need a little more attention. So I've got that first layer down with a very light brown color that is called Pebble from Concord and Ninth. And then I'm going to work on a blue color, which I just happened to grab what was closest on my shelf, which is an old retired Stampin' Up! Ink that is called Might of Navy. So use what you love, the colors that you like, and go with what you've got. So when I'm layering up these stencils, I am sure to overlap stenciling. I'm sure to use different shapes of stencils. And in this case, I am using a very, what is the word I'm looking for? A very directional looking stencil. That's the word. And so when I have that directional stencil, I'm going to want to mix that up a little bit so it doesn't look too samey in the different areas. So in this case, I'm turning it left and right. Now you could go with some diagonals and whatnot, but I'm sticking with that kind of grid look. So left and right is enough for me. And then I start working on my third layer. Again, I am increasing the saturation of the color that I'm using. And here's another little tip. If you need some areas with some more light color in the background, go ahead and use your stenciling brush with just whatever ink is left on there after stenciling another area. And then you can get a very, very hint of color in the background. So this is where I'm starting to fill in some of those gaps that I think needed a little more attention. And partially I'm using that kind of map stencil, and that is a simple story stencil, which is probably still available. I'll link you up down below if you're interested and I can find it. So Yes, build up your saturation, fill in the gaps as you go. And here I am filling in this pattern, which I already did with the lightest color, with one or more of those heavier colors. And I'm looking for the areas of this paper that just need some more texture, pattern, color, depth. And so that is what I'm looking for as I go. Let's see, where am I now? All right, this is where I am adding the most vibrant pop of color. And in this case, I want it to be a much smaller zone because it will be rich and bright. It will capture your attention. And if it's too big, it's going to take all the attention. So I want to keep this bold, bright pop of color into a smaller shape. And again, I've got this very directional kind of arrow chevron shape. And so I am going to spread that out throughout the paper so that my eye can kind of bounce around different areas of this paper. And that bright pop of color will kind of get my eye flowing. All right, with that done, I looked over my stencils and I found one more interesting shape that I wanted to give a go, which is this circle that actually has two sides to it. It's a split circle, and one side is more like a rainbow style, and then the other side is more like a sun ray style. So I'm going to go ahead and use that stencil and do two different colors on the same shape, and that'll be just another great bold textural element. So you can see what it looks like in the end. I am going to go ahead and do one more of these circles using another color combo so that I have some variety. Now, when I was stenciling those circles, a little happy accident happened where I got some excess ink on another part of the stencil, which happened to be a row of numbers. So I'm going to roll with it. I am going to purposely stencil more of these numbers on my layout, and I'm sure to fade the numbers away because that gives it more of that blueprinty look, that kind of vintagey look. And I'm also sure to use some of the upper numbers, like the 8s and 9s, as well as some of the lower numbers, again, for more variety. And here is what that paper looks like in the end. And I will give you a couple of close-up looks at that because I think the texture turned out to be very fun. And one thing I didn't mention is I did start that project on a piece of Simple Stories paper that already had a little bit of texture going on to it. So you don't have to do everything from scratch. You can start with a starting piece of paper and add on top of it. All right, that wraps up my make video for this time around. I hope you got some fun ideas out of this. And if you did, drop me a comment. I'd love to know what inspired you. I will be back next week with more videos for you. So until then, have an artful day.